the main risks to children are not of parental separation, but of parental deprivation. No one is really a winner if someone is really a loser. The question is, how do you structure the family relationships so that, that both parents can continue to be involved in the children's life, even though they're living apart from one another?
Don Hubin is chair of the National Parents Organization in the United States. He holds a PhD from the University of Arizona and is a retired professor of philosophy. Don, it's a pleasure to have you here on the podcast.
Thanks for inviting me, Warren.
Excellent. So I've become familiar with your work, with the NPO and your website, and we have a lot of great things to talk about today. Shared parenting, where it's at across different states in the country, and the public opinion on the issue, and the work that your organization is doing to change legislation. So why don't we get right into it and talk about, first of all, the report card that you've prepared. Now, I know you did this twice in 2014 and 2019. So maybe just give our audience a little introduction to what this product is and why it's important.
Sure. So in 2014, we started just collecting all of the state's child custody laws. And we were just trying to make a resource for people to be able to go to find out what the laws were in their state. And we started categorizing the state laws according to different features that they had. And as you mentioned, I was then a university professor, now retired, but I'm used to grading things. And it occurred to me that we were collecting all the information we need in order to rank the states using a grading system. And we did that on an A to F basis. And this turns out to be a very powerful tool for dealing with legislators, with the media, the general public. People love rankings and ratings, and it's almost clickbait to say, the top 10. The first thing the national media asked us when they were interviewing us was, what are the top 10 states and what are the bottom 10 states? I mean, people love having those kinds of classifications. So the report card in 2014 got some media and some attention to the shared parenting movement. We decided to do it again in 2019, and we had some good news to report. One was that actually in 2014, but after we had done our report, Arizona had passed a very strong shared parenting law. It's not an explicit equal parenting law. The language of the bill says that the court shall strive to maximize the time the children have with each parent. And we weren't entirely sure how courts were going to interpret that. But Bill Fabricius, who was instrumental in getting the legislation passed, has done follow-up research and shown that many of the courts in Arizona anyway are treating this as a default presumption of 50-50 parenting time. In 2018, NPO led the charge to get the first explicit equal parenting bill passed in Kentucky, and that was done as a result of the great work of my colleague Matt Hale from Kentucky. So we were able to, in 2019, have one state, Kentucky, that got a straight A and one state that got an A minus. I'll show you quickly what we've done with some of these results. Let me share my screen here quickly. Warren, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So this is just our website here, and the work I'm going to show you is under the heading of work here. But, excuse me. Let me get to where we are. Yeah, this is the 2019 Shared Parenting Report Card, and a quick summary here. What we did with the results, though, was to create a map that, if it's going to let me do this, hang on 1 second here. There we go. Which shows all of the states And if you mouse over the states here, you can see what the grade is, and you can see the positives and see the negatives for each of the states. And so here, for example, Kentucky gets a straight A, and we list the positives here, very few negatives. One of the things that the 2019 map does not show is that Arkansas passed the second explicit equal parenting law in April of this year. So this is Arkansas here, and you can see that when we did the study in 2019, Arkansas got a C+. They just overhauled their child custody laws to have a very strong explicit equal parenting law there. But this is a powerful tool for people to look at what the laws are in their state, see what the deficits are and how they can be improved, and work with their legislators and with the media to do that. And I've got some good news for those of you up in Canada, and that is that my colleague on the 2019 Shared Parenting Report Card, George Piscour, is a Canadian. And he did a great deal of work for those of us down under the border here on the 2019 Shared Parenting Report Card, but he's now doing a Shared Parenting Report Card for Canada. And if any people watching this would like to help with that effort, because it takes a fair number of people to be doing some research here, they should contact George Piscour, and they can do that by first emailing me, and I'll send his contact information to them. My email is easy to find. It's donhubin@sharedparenting.org.
Perfect. Great. Well, that would be wonderful. We look forward to seeing a similar report card on Canada. So this is a great product that you came up with. It's very intuitive, it's visually attractive, and it's simple and easy to use. You can find out across the whole United States where they are with regard to shared parenting legislation. And in many of those states, but not all of them, you can also find information on what the public thinks about the issue. So do you want to maybe tell us a little bit about that right now, about the opinion polls?
Absolutely. So, but one thing I do want to make clear, because this is something that's confusing to a lot of people. What the Shared Parenting Report Card does is to evaluate the state statutes. We're not evaluating what the courts are actually doing, because courts have stubbornly refused to publish that data. People, if they take a look at this, they'll see that in New York and Rhode Island, the two states that get an F, they get an F because the state legislatures there have not enacted any shared parenting legislation. That doesn't mean that courts aren't awarding shared parenting. There are higher level court decisions that allow the courts to do that. So it's important to see that what we're doing here is grading the legislature on, has it done its job of creating statutes. But Warren, you asked about public support for shared parenting, and we've been doing polling for really many years, but at first just in one or two states where we had some legislation that we were moving. Recently, we've done, in the past 2 years now, we've done polling in 20 states. And I will show you a map that shows some of the polling here. Give me 1 second. So this is a map that's on our website. If you look under the, if you look under the work category in our menu here, you'll see this map. The dark states are the states in which we've done polling, and if you, in this case, you have to click twice, once to enlarge the state and once to see the information on the state, and it'll give you information about what the poll showed about public support for shared parenting for each state. So, for example, Arkansas, which I mentioned, just passed this terrific shared parenting law as a result of an organization there called Arkansas Advocacy for Parental Equality. NPO collaborated with Arkansas Advocates for Parental Equality to do a poll that they used to help convince their legislature to pass the shared parenting legislation. And I'm not sure if you can read this on the screen, but 95% of those in Arkansas believe it's in children's best interest to have as much time as possible with each parent. 95% say they'd be more likely to vote for a candidate that supports equal or nearly equal parenting time. And 87% said that they would support a change in Arkansas law that awards children as much time as possible with each parent in cases of divorce and separation. And one of the, we've compiled the results here, and you can see in all the states that we've done very recent polling. I should say this handout is out of date because we just completed polling in 6 more states, and the results are very consistent. But this was the most up-to-date information as of the summer, and you'll see that the support for people believing that it's in a child's best interest to spend as much time as possible with each parent, the lowest one is 87%. And I don't know what's wrong with Kansas. All the rest are up in the 90% range. Do you support a change in state laws to create a presumption? And here the lowest one is, I believe, 83% supporting a change in state law. If you dig down into the data, you find that this support for shared parenting cuts across every demographic divide. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're in Arkansas, which is a small red state, Republican state, or California, which is a very large, very blue, Democratic state. The support is just the same. It's in the 90% for saying it's in children's best interest to spend as much time as possible with each parent, and across the board they support this. And we dig down into the data and we see it doesn't matter whether the respondent is a Republican or a Democrat. Doesn't matter what their family income is, what their race or religion is, and importantly, it doesn't matter what their gender is. There's just overwhelming support for shared parenting, which. And as you know, Warren, and probably most people watching know, we have about 40 years of scientific research that shows that shared parenting is best for children when parents are living apart. So that raises the question, why aren't the laws keeping up with both the science and with public opinion?
Yes, it's a very good question, and I was about to ask that because on our previous episode of this podcast, I talked with Dr. Linda Nielsen, from Wake Forest University, and she was describing her meta-analysis of around 60 studies, and these are not just from the US, they're from many countries, European countries, Canada, US, and others around the world, showing that in many different ways, equal shared parenting after separation is better for children because it helps them do better in school, they have more confidence, they're more socially well-adjusted, they tend to be acting out less, fewer social problems, etc. There's a whole series of benefits. And as you just pointed out now, if the public support for it is strong across men and women, across Republicans and Democrats, rich and poor, various races, various religions, then it should be a political no-brainer for politicians to pass these bills. And yet, according to your report card, only a few states had A's, and most of them were in, I think, kind of the B to C range. So still some improvement available in those areas. And do you have an opinion as to what that barrier or that obstacle is that needs to be overcome?
I do have an opinion. Let me first, though, give a shout out to Linda Nielsen. Professor Nielsen's work has been really terrific because she's drawn together all these different studies and summarized them, and it's extremely powerful because the different studies use different metrics for child well-being. They use different techniques for studying this, and they all come to the same conclusion overall. And what we're finding is that on virtually every metric of child well-being, children raised in equal or substantially equal shared parenting situations do about as well as children raised in intact marriages, and much better than children raised in sole custody situations. And what this tells us is that the main risks to children are not of parental separation, but of parental deprivation. And that we need to remember, because people talk about the risks of children of divorce, and those risks are not caused by the separation. They're caused by being deprived of one of their parents. Mm-hmm. And indeed, on some metrics of child well-being, the researcher Malin Bergström from Sweden has shown that children of separated parents do better than children in intact marriages because the parents aren't fighting with each other as much. So actually, they're subjected to less conflict between their parents typically.
Mhm.
But so that research is really terrific. But you asked me about my ideas about why the legislature is lagging, and I have a number of ideas on this. I think it's a topic that needs more study. But one reason is that we do confront powerful special interests. So when we promote shared parenting legislation, we are usually opposed by judges' associations who see it as a restriction on their discretion. And I should say they see it correctly as a restriction on their discretion. That is the point of the legislation. Now, it doesn't take away the discretion. We understand judges need discretion, but it does tell the judges, you've got to start with the assumption that both parents are going to continue to be equally involved in their children's lives and then have a reason to move away from that. So they see that as tying their hands. Although there are judges that support equal shared parenting presumptions. This is not uniform among judges, but in general, the judges' associations oppose it, and they oppose it for that reason typically. The Bar Association tends to oppose it. And one can come up with various hypotheses for this. But it is true that if you create presumptions of equal parenting, you will reduce the litigation, because custody litigation is extremely time-consuming and costly. And what's costly to the parents and the family is income for the lawyers. And so that's another special interest group that we encounter. Now, the third group that we encounter, and I hope we'll talk about this a little bit later, is some domestic violence groups oppose shared parenting, and they tend to have a very powerful lobby with a number of legislators. So there are those special interests that we're up against. The other thing that we're up against is this: while overwhelmingly the public supports equal shared parenting, it's probably not the number one issue for a whole lot of people. And it's probably not the number one issue for most legislators. So you can meet with legislators and they say, yes, I agree with you, but it's not going to be on my agenda to push this. I just don't have the bandwidth to do that. Mm-hmm. So, to combat that, we need to put pressure on the legislators. To combat the special interest groups, we need to educate the legislators about the scientific research on child well-being, and then really press them to do what's best for kids and not to knuckle under to special interests.
Mm-hmm. So on this point, actually, maybe I could inquire as to how you got success in Kentucky, because between the two reports that you released, I think that was the biggest change, upgrade actually, from a D to an A. And so who were you working with on that journey in order to change minds and change the law? And what was your strategy?
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that Matt Hale, who was then the chair of NPO in Kentucky, he's now on the national board. He was the architect of the Kentucky law and the strategy that was used there. And the strategy was one that NPO has advocated for some time, and that is to first introduce a bill to create a presumption of equal parenting during temporary orders, during the pendency of the trial. And that is a strategic step, because when we ask legislators to vote for an equal parenting bill for permanent orders, the judges will always say, every case is different. Don't tie our hands. Don't create a presumption. Let us do what's best for that particular family in that particular case. And when you push a bill for temporary orders, the response is, fine, after you know something about what's going on with this family, make that decision. But don't take one parent out of full parenting mode. Don't sideline one parent before you know anything about what's going on in the family. And, courts have a tendency to think, well, temporary orders, it's only temporary, but the temporary orders can go for 1, 2, 3 years sometimes. Courts try to do them quickly, but sometimes it gets dragged out by attorneys and so forth. And, 2 years in the life of a 4-year-old is a significant amount of time. It's perceived very differently than it is by adults. And furthermore, the temporary orders set a status quo. They set a presumption for how things are going to go forward. And even though in no state do the temporary orders create a legal presumption in favor of them being correct, they do create a status quo. And suppose that one parent gets temporary full custody and wants to keep that for the permanent orders, and the other parent wants equal custody, equal physical custody. Well, the parent that's arguing for equal physical custody is in the position of arguing to the court, we want you to make a bet on a parenting arrangement that you haven't seen operate and make it a permanent arrangement. And courts are understandably reluctant to do that. They say, well, if the kids are doing reasonably well in this sole custody arrangement, why upset the apple cart, right? So there are really good arguments for starting off with equal parenting time during temporary orders. And those arguments make it a fairly easy, or I should say an easier case to make for that. And so in 2017, Matt Hale led the charge to get a bill presuming that equal parenting time was in the best interest of children during temporary orders. And that passed the legislature with no negative votes, not a single negative vote in the House or the Senate. Right. Kentucky is a Republican state, but there are Democrats in both chambers of the legislature. There were no negative votes at all. It was such a popular law. It made so much sense to Kentuckians that the next year they came back with a bill for a presumption of equal custody in permanent orders, and that passed with only 2 negative votes in the legislature. And I should say, one of the negative votes came from a person who chose not to run in the next election, and the other negative vote came from a person who had won multiple elections before and lost her election to a challenger. Now, it's hard to trace down the causes of an individual loss, but I can tell you that Matt Hale thinks that the opposition to shared parenting actually hurt that legislator in Kentucky. Mm-hmm. So the strategy was to first go for temporary orders and then for permanent orders. But in Arkansas, they did it all in one step. They got a very good shared parenting bill. It went through with bipartisan support and overwhelming support in the legislature. And they did it in a single step. One of the things that's important for people to know is you don't have to amass an army of people to get legislation moving. You need a group of people who are willing to dedicate some time and effort, willing to talk to legislators. It's highly desirable to find someone who has expertise in this area. In Kentucky, they were fortunate to have a professor there at the University of Louisville, then at the University of Louisville, Ryan Schroeder, who could testify about the value of shared parenting for children. So that's another important tool in trying to move shared parenting legislation.
Yes. Well, thank you for that story. It's very good to hear how you did it, and so that we can hopefully share this message with other people in provinces and states where they're hoping to do the same thing. In Kentucky, I just want to stay on that story for a minute, because after the law was passed, you were mentioning to me, and I saw a news report as well, that a few things happened as a result of that. One is that the family court caseloads have gone down because fewer people are having to go, into court to fight to keep their children, to keep custody, and domestic violence filings have also gone down, despite the fact that the population is going up in that state. They're seeing less domestic violence and less family court battles. So do you want to tell us about what happened there?
Absolutely, and I'll show you some data. It's interesting because you'll often hear attorneys and judges complain about how parents are fighting, or these parents are fighting one another, and they never acknowledge, they never admit that the system really sets it up for parents to fight against one another. It's like, throwing people into a death match and then saying they're fighting against one another. The system creates that conflict. And interestingly, the polling that I showed you before, one of the questions that we have been asking in recent years is, when there's conflict between the parents, do you think that an award of sole custody increases the conflict, decreases the conflict, or has no effect? And consistently, over 75% of people say they think it increases the conflict. When an involved, loving parent is faced with the threat of losing the relationship that's most valuable to him or her with the children, of course they're going to fight. So when you take that out of the mix, when in effect you say to people, look, you're both good involved parents, you're gonna share in the parenting equally. Now work it out. It's much easier to work things out. And then the question is, what's the best schedule for us given our work schedules and things like that? How do we do it? So it does reduce the conflict, and it has reduced the court load in Kentucky. And then the other thing that I mentioned earlier, that sometimes shared parenting advocates are opposed by domestic violence groups. Now, in Kentucky, they were fortunate because there was one domestic violence group that opposed the shared parenting legislation, but another one that supported it. I think that the domestic violence group in Kentucky that supported it has the view that's better supported by the evidence following this. So just to share my screen one more time, these are the data for 3 years on the number of contested divorce cases and the number of domestic violence cases in Kentucky. And you'll see that 2018, 2019, and 2020, they've consistently gone down. And these data come directly from it's the Kentucky Court's analytic website. I've got the link here, and it's available on our webpage as well. So here's what I think is going on, Warren. When you remove one of the major sources of conflict, you're likely to have less domestic violence arising. I never make any excuse for domestic violence. It's a horrible thing when it happens. But sometimes people are driven to become violent because they find what they really care about is threatened. And that's not the right way to deal with it, but there are people who do that. And when you take away one of the major sources of conflict, you reduce the provocation to violence. The other thing, Warren, that I've never understood about the argument that a presumption of shared parenting, presumption of equal shared parenting, is somehow bad for domestic violence is this. In virtually every state, in virtually every court, the non-residential parent, unless there are special circumstances, will have the children every other weekend and usually one evening a week for a dinner or something like that. Well, you can arrange equal shared parenting arrangements where there's much less contact between the parents than there is in that old 1950s every other weekend schedule. The every other weekend is, usually dad is the non-custodial parent, picks the kids up at 6 on Friday and drops them off at 6 on Sunday. Well, those are 2 times when mom and dad come into contact with one another, and there are opportunities for there to be disputes and potentially violence. And the evening, if it's every Wednesday evening for dinner, the dad picks them up at 6 and drops them off at 8 or whatever the schedule is there. Those are all opportunities for contact. Equal parenting can be done where the exchanges of the children happen in school or in daycare. So dad drops them off one morning at school and mom picks them up in the afternoon, or they take the bus from dad's house in the morning and take the bus to mom's house in the afternoon. You can arrange the schedule so there are far fewer points of contact between the parents if the parents are locked in some sort of conflict. So, conflict is bad for kids, but the solution isn't to marginalize one parent, which is likely to just exacerbate the conflict. The solution is to reduce the opportunities for there to be that conflict.
Right. And I think it does seem that the current system, the default status quo, is quite adversarial, at least as far as family court is concerned. It's been described as kind of a winner-take-all situation where a relationship breakdown happens, and then suddenly you find yourself fighting with your ex-partner, head to head, in order to keep your children in your own life. And not having the default presumption of equal shared parenting, it really makes it seem like, this is your only opportunity to have a relationship with your children. And if you lose it now, they'll be out of your life. And so obviously it's a high stakes, high pressure situation. And the lawyers, as you pointed out earlier, are making a lot of money from it because it's in their interest to have a longer process where they can have more billable hours rather than a simple, a simplified, low conflict process that's better for the parents and better for the kids, but it doesn't result in as many fees.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Another source of conflict is how we handle child support. And if you will, I want to tell you just a little bit about a new project that NPO is just about to roll out now. The states in the U.S. have a great deal of freedom in how they design their child support program. And we have on our website, I think maybe I'll share this with you quickly. I have to pull it up. Hang on one second here. Oops, excuse me. We have another map here that shows you the wide variation in child support awards between different states. So, for example, if you look at, let's pick Massachusetts, under a particular scenario, this is one child, and we're assuming a median income for dad and a median income for mom, and dad has the kids 35% of the time, I think is our assumption here. The dad would, under that scenario, be paying $949 a month in child support for that one child. If you look at, say, New Mexico, under the same scenario, $276 a month. Arizona, $374. There's no rhyme or reason to these differences. And child support is another thing that leads people to fight over child custody. So NPO is just about to roll out really a groundbreaking piece of research on child support and shared parenting. We decided it didn't make sense to grade our states on child support overall because there's so many different factors and facets that to reduce it to a single grade would just conceal more than it revealed. But we realized that we could grade the states on the degree to which their child support laws promote or inhibit shared parenting. And since shared parenting is the core of NPO's mission, that made sense. And so a team of researchers at NPO have studied the child support guidelines of all 50 states in the District of Columbia, and we're just about to release a report card on that as well. And I can't go into detail about the results because it's not published yet, but I can give some broad overview. First of all, we found just enormous differences in the way the states handle this. But many states have significant barriers to shared parenting in their child support laws. So when a parent goes in and talks to a lawyer, the lawyer says, well, don't agree to that because it's going to make a big difference in your child support payments, more for the payer or less for the recipient, whatever. And that's a source of conflict. So, for example, 9 states don't have any parenting time adjustment in their guidelines. What that means is that the person paying child support will presumptively pay the same amount of child support if that parent never sees the children at all, or if that parent has the children with them 40 or 50% of the time. And if they want to get a deviation, they have to go to court and they have to overcome a presumption. that the guidelines are correct. So there are 9 states that don't even recognize any of the direct expenses that the non-residential parent has on the children. And there are a number of states, quite a few, that have a parenting time adjustment, but that parenting time adjustment doesn't kick in until 150 days, 150 overnights in a year. So getting close to 50% of the time. And so if you want to create a system in which parents fight over insignificant differences in parenting time, create a huge cliff effect. Make it the case that if the non-residential parent has the children 120 days, they pay a whole lot. If they have them 121 days, they pay a whole lot less. And you will have lots of parents fighting over whether it's 120 or 121 days. So we're grading the states on those factors. Do they have a parenting time adjustment? Does a parenting time adjustment have an unreasonable threshold? Does it create cliff effects? Does it recognize the direct expenses of both parents on their children? So I think that's going to be a really important contribution to reviewing child support guidelines in the U.S. Mm-hmm. I don't know much about the child support system in Canada, but I think it's worth looking at what the assumptions are and whether the child support laws are actually a significant impediment to shared parenting.
Right. Well, that'll be a good, interesting report to read when it comes out. So I look forward to that. I hope you'll send me the link.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to make a comment about something you said a little earlier. We've been talking about a default presumption of equal shared parenting, but this does not mean that every divorce situation has to have 50-50 time between the two parents, regardless of the circumstances and the scenario and the individuals involved. Of course, it still allows judges some leeway and some flexibility to use their judgment and to make decisions. For example, if there is physical violence by one of the parents, most people would agree it's not in the best interests to expose that child to the violent parent more. So clearly there's a protective element that needs to be put in there. Or if one of the parents is, heavily addicted to drugs and alcohol or has criminal behavior, there's always factors that need to be considered. The default should be assuming all else being equal, that the two parents are capable parents and that they are loving parents and they want to do the best as parents for their children. That should be the starting point, right? And then from there, you can deviate if you need to.
Absolutely. And the first point to make, even before those sorts of exceptions that you mentioned, is courts should defer to parental agreement. I mean, if the parents want to do it in a different arrangement, if the parents want one parent to have 70% of the time and one 30% of the time, courts shouldn't be imposing their judgment over the judgment of fit parents. Now, that agreement of the parents has to be one that's made, agreements are made in the shadow of the law. Everyone who's ever taken a law class knows that. And so it's important it's important for parents to know that they can have equal parenting if they want to, and they're good, loving parents and fit and so forth. But if, knowing that, they agree to a 70-30 split, the court should defer to parents. I mean, parents are the primary guardians of the welfare of their children. That's something that we have almost 100 years of legal jurisprudence in the U.S. Endorsing. But as you mentioned, there are other reasons why courts should deny a request for shared parenting. And every shared parenting bill that I've seen, and certainly every one that NPO has backed, has an exception when there's domestic violence. And there are other factors that the court has to consider. The question is really, where do you start? What's the presumption, right? And what we're saying is the presumption should be both parents are equally involved. Now, give us a reason why not.
Yes, and as I'm sure you're well aware, that the current situation in the US and Canada, when there is a decision made for an unequal parenting custody scenario, where one parent gets sole custody or they get majority custody, most of the time, the vast majority of the time, it goes to the mother. And there's no controversy about that. But the controversy is why is that the case?
Yeah.
And I think, what we've been talking about on previous episodes of this podcast is the societal and legal and cultural assumptions we make about men and women and fathers and mothers. And there seems to be an opinion in a lot of people's minds, whether unconscious or conscious, that mothers are more important than fathers. Obviously, because when a child is very, very young, under 2 years old, it needs its mother to survive. But people don't see it, the father's role, as being quite as important. And as of course, with there's a lot of social science research that's not actually the case, that fathers are very important, that they play a significant role in their child's development and their well-being. And if you read Warren Farrell's book, The Boy Crisis, he goes into all the reasons why fathers are important and they're necessary. So what we need to change, besides the law, is people's views as to fathers and mothers and their role in the family. And that's an uphill battle. It's kind of a long story that we have to tell, and it's a challenge.
It is, Warren. And one of the things I keep reminding people in NPO of is that what ultimately matters is really how kids are raised, not what the statutes say. So if the statutes all say equal shared parenting, but parents go in there and say, well, no, mom is really the parent that should have primary custody, kids aren't going to be raised in equal parenting situations. And there are, as you indicate, there are internalized norms that lead many people to think that it's more important for moms to be the primary parent. So one of the things I keep reminding people is that what we're really about is reforming the norms of separated parenting, not just reforming the laws, because reforming the laws won't do enough. Actually, almost every court would order equal shared parenting if two parents went in and said, we want equal shared parenting. Courts would generally defer to the parents, unless there were one of the exceptions we were talking about earlier, when the parent was a drug addict or was violent or something. So, you wouldn't even need legislative changes if we really had a norm of doing equal parenting. And one of the interesting things is that, I mentioned that people in Canada are doing a shared parenting report card. We're also working with people in the European Union to do a report card there. And one of the issues that was raised is that the Nordic countries, Sweden, Finland, Norway, those are countries where it's just the norm for parents to do equal shared parenting when they split. They may not have the strongest laws in favor of equal shared parenting because they don't really need them. That's just the practice there. So it is really important to recognize that this is a larger issue. The battle has to be fought on numerous fronts. It's not just a matter of changing statutes. It's a matter of changing hearts and minds, certainly of the judges and of attorneys and of mediators and counselors and so forth, but of parents. Fathers need to understand that they're important to their children at all stages of development. And moms need to understand that as well. And there are some groups that are really focused on that. There's a group called Dad 2.0, which is really trying to combat the negative stereotypes of fathers. And, watch commercial TV for a few nights, and you are bound to see an advertisement that makes fun of the inept, bumbling father who can't do anything right. Or you look at the sitcoms, Everybody Loves Raymond, or The Simpsons for that matter. Fathers are portrayed often as inept, as dangerous to their children sometimes, those things have an effect on people's perceptions.
Yes, I fully agree. I think that we don't fully recognize the harm that all of those entertainment programs, films, television, etc., that's done to our society over decades. Really, I think it started in probably the 80s. It certainly rose in the 90s, and it continues right up until today. One of the previous guests I spoke with was Paul Nathanson, who's a Canadian religious studies researcher. And we did an episode on misandry, and we focused part of our talk on the media and how you do have these stereotypes of the bumbling father or the evil father, but where's the image of the good father, the responsible, loving, capable dad? And I think the number of programs that feature that kind of a character are few compared to the ones that show the alternative. Yeah. So that's another battlefront, is the cultural side besides the law. And so I just wanted to say a couple more things. One is about Canada. You might be aware that we had a few efforts. Canadian Association for Equality was pushing for the same legal changes here in Canada. Our law is a little different in that the federal government, I hope I'm correct on this, they have jurisdiction over child custody and access matters and spousal and child support during a divorce, whereas property division is more under provincial jurisdiction, so how you split up the assets. But the parenting time is a federal thing, so you need a bill through the House of Commons. And we had Bill C-560 in around 2013, which was an effort to reform the Divorce Act. And then more recently in 2018 with Bill C-78. And we had individuals like Jean Coleman, who's a family lawyer in Toronto, and Brian Ledmer, who's another a lawyer in Canada, working to have this default equal shared parenting presumption put into those. Unfortunately, they didn't pass. And unfortunately, the Canadian Bar Association argued against the more recent amendment. So I think that we still are struggling to get that passed in Canada, and we will continue to push for that. But one thing you said earlier about the level of attention and care on the political front is, you're right that this issue is not a issue that it's not something that's kind of top of mind in an election. It's kind of down the list towards the middle or the bottom, if it's even on there for most politicians, right? But it's the sort of thing where you don't think about it until it happens to you. So every citizen is paying taxes. Everybody lives in the environment. So we want a clean environment. We're all affected by climate change. We all live in houses, almost everybody anyways. So, housing is an important issue. Certainly where I live in Vancouver, housing's a very important issue. The environment's a big issue. Taxes and the economy and jobs are big issues because they affect everybody all the time. But family law is an issue that affects people. It kind of goes from 0 to 100. If you're single or you're in a happily married relationship with children, you don't really think about it. But at the moment where you're about to get divorced, or you're in the proceedings, or you recently got divorced, suddenly for you personally, it becomes an extremely important issue. But it's not really on the political radar most of the time.
That's right, Warren. And one of the unfortunate things I've learned in the more than 25 years that I've been involved in this now is that too many of those people for whom it becomes a really, really important issue when they are going through it, just walk away from the issue when it gets settled. When it gets settled for them, good, bad, or somewhere in the middle, they walk away. They forget about the issue, And I've always felt that those of us who weren't destroyed by the system have an obligation to correct it so it doesn't keep on, hurting families in the future. So I don't know what to do to get people who when they go through it, as you said, they go from 0 to 100 on this. Unfortunately, a lot of them don't keep that, anger and sort of righteous indignation about what happened to them burning to have them, make changes. And we need to keep more people involved in the system.
Yeah, I agree. So I'm just curious, maybe to go right back to the beginning where I should have started this conversation, but you were a professor of philosophy. So how did you come to be interested in issues of shared parenting and child custody, and how did you get involved with the NPO?
So this probably won't surprise you, But I got involved in this the way most do from my own personal experience. I was divorced from my children's mother in the early to mid 90s. I thought that I understood the law pretty well. I'm not a lawyer, but I had taught philosophy of law for more than 20 years at that point. So I understood how to read cases. I understood what the legal principles were and so forth. And my head was spinning by what happened to me in domestic relations court. And in particular, in the temporary orders, because I was the one that moved out, I was declared a non-custodial parent based on no evidence whatsoever. And that really amazed me that happened. I'll tell a story I haven't told very often in public. There was a time past my divorce when I was not getting as much work done as I should have gotten done. I wasn't getting as much published as I should get published. And this is an appreciated fact about divorce. It is a huge drain on the economy. I'm not just talking about the money that could be going to the benefit of the children is actually going to lawyers. I'm talking about the fact that people are distracted from their work. They have more sick days. They can't focus on their work because they're fighting their custody battle. But so I was complaining about this to one of my old professors, and he said, "Well, Don, this is what really animates you. This is what you should be writing about, and publishing about." And I thought, that's actually a pretty good idea. So I wrote a paper in 1999 on the constitutional rights of parents and the ways in which domestic relations courts violate those rights routinely. I mean, the courts have said that parental rights are the U.S. courts, that parental rights are fundamental constitutional rights. That has a distinct meaning in American law, and that is that they can't be infringed on unless there is a compelling state interest and you can show that there's no less constitutionally offensive way to achieve that interest than to interfere with those rights. And when parents go in and the temporary orders are given and mom has custody and dad's non-custodial, dad's just been deprived of a whole bunch of his fundamental constitutional rights with no showing that this is a benefit to the children at all. So I wrote a paper called Parental Rights and Due Process, in which I sort of blasted the U.S. legal system for this inconsistency. And then that led me to get interested in the question of, well, what is the basis of parental rights in the first place, and what are the limits of parental rights and so forth? And so I wrote a number of articles on issues connected with, what does it mean legally to declare that someone's the father, and on the basis of what do we do that? And so it became one of my main areas of research after that. It's an interesting example of how painful personal experience can lead to sort of intellectual growth.
It can, yes. And as unfortunate as it is, it's the fact that you're sharing your story with others, and you've done so in the past and here again, it makes it useful to a lot of people, and it lets them know, other people who are going through tough circumstances, that they're not the only ones, they're not alone. And this is an issue that affects a lot of people. I mean, it doesn't affect 100% of the population, but it'll affect a significant percentage over the course of their lifetime. Either they are the child of divorced parents, or they themselves will get divorced, or maybe it's their relative or their neighbor or something. So it's quite a wide issue. When you consider how high the divorce rate is in total for all marriages, at some point it's likely that many people will encounter this.
That's right. And, you said something earlier about the divorce system being very contentious and adversarial. I sometimes think that if someone from a really alien culture were to come and study the way those of us in the Anglo-American legal systems handle divorce, they would think that the system was designed by a sadist. I mean, why is it when parents are separating, when it's they're judging it's best for them not to stay together anymore, why is it that we handle that with an adversarial system that's designed to handle criminal justice and things like corporate lawsuits against one another? One of the things people fail to appreciate is that if you have children, there's still a family there. It's a separated family, but there's still a family there. There are going to be, graduations and marriages and the birth of grandchildren and so forth. And what you don't, no one is really a winner if someone is really a loser. The question is, how do you structure the family relationships so that, that both parents can continue to be involved in the children's life, even though they're living apart from one another? So that's important to remember. The other thing that I just reminded myself of, I said, I asked, how do we get more parents who have gone through this and seen how flawed the system is to, once their case is done, to stay with the movement to try to correct the family law system? And one of the things I often do is to remind people, you have kids. That's why this was such a painful experience for you. What's going to happen to your kids if they divorce? Do you want to leave for them the same system that you confronted when you divorced? And that's one of the things that motivates me, because I've got kids. Mm-hmm. We owe them a better system for dealing with family breakup.
Indeed, we do. And we have to think about, what we're leaving for the next people coming through the process. Now that your case is resolved or you have a way forward, you have to think about all the other parents in the coming years who will have to go through it, and what are they going to be up against? What costs and challenges and burdens. So it's in our interest to make it as simple and low conflict as possible.
Yep.
I just wanted to ask you about a couple of things. One is your website. You have an e-learning portal. You have a lot of resources on here, videos and such from a number of different speakers. They look like they're experts in their fields. Do you want me to tell me maybe a little bit about this site and what it offers?
Yeah, sure. Let me share my screen again. So back in 2017, NPO, under the leadership of Ned Holstein, who was the founder of National Parents Organization, put on, together with the International Council on Shared Parenting, what I believe is still the most important shared parenting conference ever held. And you'll recognize some of the names of the speakers. And they include people like Michael Lamb, who's one of the leading researchers on fatherhood, Stanford Braver, who wrote the book, still a terrific book. I think it was published in 1999, but still a terrific book called Divorced Dads, Shattering the Myths. Professor Braver was the first person to study divorced fathers, by actually talking to the fathers. Prior to that, almost everything we knew about divorced fathers, or thought we knew about divorced fathers, came from talking to the mothers. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist to realize that might not be the best way to get accurate information, to talk to someone's ex. Linda Nielsen, who you had on your podcast recently, was there. Richard Warshaw, who wrote some terrific papers on child custody, especially of younger children, including the very important consensus report that 111 researchers and practitioners signed on to, saying there is no research basis for denying overnights to non-custodial parents of small children. William Fabricius, who I mentioned earlier, was the driving force in the Arizona shared parenting law. Jennifer Harmon, who is now the president of International Council of Shared Parents on Shared Parenting, and one of the leading researchers on parental alienation, and it goes on and on. So this was a really terrific conference. We decided that it was so important that we wanted to make the videos of these presentations available to everyone for free. So if you go to our website and look under research, scroll down, you'll find the page that says videos of the 2017 Shared Parenting Conference. These are really world-class researchers presenting terrifically important research.
Excellent. Well, we'll put a link to that in the description of this video, but that's a great resource to have. I wanted to ask you also, from the point of view of a listener here, if they care about the issue and they want to get involved, either by donating their time or their money, or maybe they want to contact their local politician, to try and advocate for these kinds of laws, what do you suggest that that person does? How do they begin?
So the first thing I would say to everyone is don't start an organization, join an organization, because people who go through this, they often say, I'm going to start an organization. We don't need more organizations. What we need are more people working together. And if you're in the States, I would say join National Parents Organization. Not surprising that I would say that, but let me tell you why I joined National Parents Organization. I was leading a statewide organization here in Ohio, and then I was unable to continue that because of work duties, my day job, and I handed it off to someone, and that organization died. But when I was heading up this organization, I learned of the work that Ned Holstein had done it was then called Fathers and Families, now National Parents Organization in Massachusetts. And I met him at a conference in Washington, D.C. And I said, I really admire what you're doing there because you're keeping your eye on the prize. It's a child-focused, research-based organization that is talking about what's best for children. It's not an angry dad's organization. It doesn't tie up the shared parenting movement with left politics or right politics. It's just about shared parenting. And I asked about the possibility of becoming a chapter of Fathers and Families then. And he said, at this point, we're just a state-based organization. We're not, ready to expand into other states. But then a few years later, he came back to me and he said, we are ready and we'd like you to start up a chapter in Ohio. So I became the chair of the Ohio then Fathers and Families, and then we changed our name to National Parents Organization to sort of emphasize. But first of all, one of the things that's very important for people to remember is, as you said, Warren, almost always when there's a sole custody award, it goes to mom, and dad becomes the non-custodial parent. But the only thing that's worse than being a good fit father in the daddy track is being a good fit mother who gets in the daddy track. Because then, in addition to the deprivation of your relationship with your children, there's also the stigma. How did you lose custody? What's wrong with you? With a father, everyone said, well, yeah, of course, dads lose custody, right? We have, I think, probably half of our chapter leaders are mothers or their grandmothers who have lost the relationship with their grandchildren because of a divorce of their own child. So Fathers and Families, it sent the wrong message to some people. It was really all about getting fathers, connected with their children. But, we realized it's really about getting children and parents connected, keeping them connected. So then I was invited to join the national board, I think in 2014. And I worked on the national board, and that's when we created the shared parenting report card and so forth. And then when Ned Holstein decided to retire from National Parents Organization after having built this terrific organization, I was chosen to be the chair of it. But so if you're asking what should people do, join an organization. I think NPO is terrific because it is, as I just said, child-focused and research-based. Obviously, on our website, we have opportunities to give money. You can't do anything without money. We need money to run. But National Parents Organization is an almost all volunteer organization. All of our chapter leaders, everyone in the chapters, they're volunteers. I'm a volunteer. Other people on our national board are volunteers. Almost everyone is a volunteer, donating enormous amounts of time. Some of us do enormous amounts of time. I'm retired. I can devote a lot of time to this, and it is my passion. But, others devote the time that they can, and there's plenty of work to be done. So people can contact us, and there's a website. You can go to the website, and it has a Get Involved thing and find out how to do that. You can donate money. If there's a chapter in your state, there's a link to take you to that chapter leader, and you can ask what you can do to donate time. If there's no chapter active in your state, we have chapters in about 28 states now, I think. If there's no active chapter in your state, we have a form that you can fill out to see if you would be an appropriate leader for an NPO chapter. Mm-hmm. And it's a great bunch of people. They're from all walks of life and from very different political perspectives, but they're all united by trying to change this very flawed family law system that we have in the States and you have in Canada.
Yes, that's right. Well, that's good. That gives people a path forward. So thank you for those suggestions, and I hope some people take you up on that offer. Many of our audience will be in Canada because we, of course, are the Canadian Association for Equality, but they can contact us, and there's other advocates, George Pisker, as you mentioned,
Mhm.
and others, Edward Kruk from British Columbia, working on this issue here. So we do have like a little group of advocates that are trying to push for the similar laws here. And I wonder if we have an easier job because it's under federal jurisdiction. We just have to pass the law one time, whereas you have to do it 50 different times, right, with all the states.
There is that, although, it's one big thing you have to do there.
Yes. And I was just curious. So with the positive stories that you have in Arizona, Kentucky, Arkansas, do you know if those state governors or people working within those areas talk to their counterparts in other US states? Like, do they ever say, hey, check out this law, and by the way, it's saving us money, and it's lowering domestic violence, and it's lowering our court backlog? Do they talk to their counterparts in the neighboring states?
That's a terrific question, Warren. I suspect the answer is no. They have opportunities to do so. There are associations of governors, and there are Association of Republican Governors, Association of Democratic Governors. But for reasons we said, this is probably not at the top of the list, especially in the currently polarized United States right now. I suspect there's not much talk about that. Now, when we work with a legislator in one state on a bill, we always encourage them to contact some of the legislators in the states that have passed this legislation to see how they did it and to get the word from another legislator. So there's that kind of communication that goes on there. But I suspect that when the governors get together, shared parenting isn't at the top of their agenda. Right.
And it's kind of a puzzle to me because if you think about a young child that's in elementary school or not even yet in school, whether they're going to grow up with significant relationships with two parents or just one parent, to that child's life, that makes a massive difference. And it's not a small number of children. We're talking, I don't know, maybe in the millions, over time that are affected by these laws. And you would think that when it's got such a human impact that the people governing states would care about those kinds of things.
Yes. Well, they should, but
good. Okay, well, thank you very much, Don. It's been a pleasure to speak with you, and I really appreciate taking the time to come on the podcast and share your stories with us.
Well, thanks, Warren, and please keep me up to date on the progress there in Canada.
I will, definitely. We have our Momentum Conference coming up in December with CAFE and CCMF, so there'll be some good discussions happening at that. And of course, we have to mention that later this month is International Men's Day. Mm-hmm. We'll be looking forward to that as well. But I hope we get a chance to speak in the future as well.
Great, Warren. I'd look forward to that.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.